She started working with those guys not too long back, but she's active in partnerships that are geared towards building better policy and more opportunity across the country. This is a fantastic organization. It's connecting all the really important things that are happening in our rural communities with respect to transportation and broadband, all of the workforce development pieces. If you haven't seen their website, you need to go take a look at it. Whitney's actually from nearby McMinn County, and she's up here today to talk to us about what's at stake connecting rural communities to quality, affordable broadband. So if you would, please welcome Whitney.
So this is the button I push,
Yes,
right?
thanks.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you. Wow, a mic is never too short for me, except in this case. That's awesome. So yes, my name is Whitney Kimball-Coe, and I'm the Director of National Programs for the Center for Rural Strategies, and I've been working with Rural Strategies for about 8 years now. It's a really phenomenal organization. I'm very proud of it. I'm also the coordinator of the National Rural Assembly, which is a national coalition of participants from across the country, across regions, and across communities, people who advocate for rural communities, advocate on behalf of rural communities around issues like broadband or healthcare access, transportation is certainly one, arts and culture is another, economic prosperity. So we gather every other year for a national gathering, and we just had one in 2015, September 2015 in Washington, D.C., where we had participation from the White House and from several cabinet members, including Secretary of Agriculture Tom Vilsack. And I was thinking I might pull a Vilsack on you this morning or this afternoon, but I'm pretty sure Julie wouldn't like that, so I won't. He came into our conference, and he had his script in his hand, and he said, you all know what you're doing better than I do, so I'm just going to put this down, and we're just going to have a conversation. And we were all just taken aback, but we did. We spent an hour of back and forth conversing with the Secretary of Agriculture, asking him some really hard questions, and he gave us some really difficult answers that are wrapped up in politics and our current extreme rhetoric at the moment, and also this divide that is existing between rural and urban America, which we definitely need to be closing, because most of us are living rural and urban lives at this moment. Another thing, Julie, I don't think you knew that you're getting a twofer with this one, because I'm a product of broadband access. I get to live and work in my community of choice, which is a small town, Athens, Tennessee, and work for a national organization. So I'm connected to a broader economy and a world lifestyle, but I still get to enjoy the community engagement that I was brought up on. And broadband does that for me. I wanted to get a quick, maybe I want you to stand up. Yeah, everybody stand up. That's what we'll do. In my other life, I'm a fitness instructor at the YMCA. And I just taught a class this morning, and I feel really strongly that movement's very important, especially after lunch. So everybody, let's raise up your hands up to the sky, and we're gonna go over to the right. To the right, to the left, whichever way, go your own way. And we're gonna bring our arms down slowly. And I'm gonna take a deep breath. Okay. All right. Before you sit down, wait. I want to know, let's see, if you live in a rural community, please continue to stand. Other folks, sit down. Yeah. Sweet. Of those of you still standing, how many of you have experienced poor connection through your home computer, or a dropped phone call, or static phone calls, or if any of these issues have happened to you, continue standing. Oh, and yes, urban may join. Yes. So, I mean, that's a disturbing number of people, but you all may sit down now. Okay. So just to give you a few quick facts about Tennessee's connectivity, we're not the worst. in the country. I think we rank about 29th in terms of the most connected states in the country. There are about 1 million people in Tennessee who are not connected to high-speed, quality internet, as defined by the FCC. I don't know if Amy New is still in here, but if the Economic Community Development Task Force is looking for to define broadband, the FCC currently defines it as 25 megabits per second upload speed, download speed, and 3 megabits per second upload speed. So just to give you an idea of what that means, 25 is what they think you need to be able to stream without extreme buffering, stream things on the internet. So if you are wanting to watch a Netflix piece, you definitely need at least 25. But it's the upload speed, that number 3, that creates economic prosperity in communities. And currently, 1 million people in Tennessee do not have that capacity, and most of them are rural. And so for those of us who live in rural, we may, our service providers may say they have wired us and connected us, but that's not necessarily the case if we can't do either one of those things, whether it's streaming something or uploading something or being connected to our medical records. So just keep that number in mind, that about 1 million people in Tennessee can't do that. The digital split then looks to be about 85-15%. So 85% of the state is connected, which is great. So we just need to get that last 15% up to speed. No pun intended. Yes, pun intended. Never mind. So I've written down most of my comments just so that I can get through a lot. This is just such a complex issue, and it's so rife with politics and bad guys and good guys, and I don't want to go there. In fact, this is way beyond my maturity level to be talking about this, in a way. But we're going to try, and I'm going to try to get through it all. Let's see. So, as I said, I'm the poster child. I get to live in my community, work remotely for the Center for Rural Strategies, and I still get to engage in my community. So I mentioned I'm a fitness instructor at the YMCA. I'm really involved in community theater. In fact, we have a performance tonight of Shadowlands. If you're in Athens, come see us at the Arts Center. My children go to the same school that I went to when I was a young person, and they also went to the same daycare. My dad works for the last community bank in McMinn County. My mother was the executive director of the Arts Center, so I feel like I have very, very deep roots in Athens, and the reason I can live there, again, is because of my connectivity. So it's not just a rural problem. I believe one urban person stood up when I asked if there were any dropped calls or, fuzziness. It's an us problem. We have a problem across borders. So I just want to say that this is a difficult issue that's not going to be resolved in 20 minutes, but I hope that I'm going to tell you something that you haven't heard before, or that you'll take away some sort of energy to start working on this issue in your community. And I would stress that the task of connecting rural families, the task of connecting rural families to essential services and opportunities is one of the great social, economic, and moral imperatives of our time. I would stress that this is really a moral imperative because communication is a fundamental need for all of us human beings. We need to feel connected. So the 3 big takeaways from my talk, I just want to make sure that you all believe that all communities matter because we are so interconnected. Zip codes be damned, We all are weaving in and out of our communities. And in Tennessee, if you represent a Tennessee county here, then you have rural communities in your county, even if you're Knox County. The second thing is that rural voices must always be at the decision-making table. So, as just a big example, the federal Clean Power Plan. Some states have decided that they're going to go ahead and start working on this federal Clean Power Plan, and a lot of them are not inviting rural communities to come and think about this with them, and yet rural communities are the keepers of most of our land and most of our energy, and they're not at the table and thinking about how we reduce emissions. It's the same kind of thing with broadband. So much of the broadband policies that are being passed these days are geared toward metro areas, and rural communities are being left behind. Every policy and regulation has a rural consequence, whether it's good or bad, and often those policies, like I said, are made with metro areas in mind. Because rural areas don't have the people or the high density that we were talking about earlier, and I like to call it souls. We don't have the number of souls that are needed or the money that make us look as attractive as metro areas. Number 3, we can't wait for the last mile to come to us. It's not in the interest of market-based service providers to serve rural America. Like I said, we just don't have enough souls, enough people. So it's incumbent upon all of you in this room to go home and talk to your planners, commissioners, city councilmen, mayors, and make sure that broadband is on their radar as an economic prosperity tool. There's also a fourth point that I wanted to make that I didn't get in on this slide, and that's that while broadband access doesn't guarantee economic prosperity or well-being of a community, studies suggest that without it, communities will fail. It's just like roads, if you want to think of it that way, or even electricity. Without it, you all know, you can't get in and you can't get out, really, or you're stuck. You're stuck where you are. All right. I think I can flip that slide. So our futures are very much bound up in our collective health, our education, and our economy, and we require an infrastructure that will support positive collective outcomes. But currently, the health and education and the economy of rural places is in crisis. And if you live in a rural community, and I live in a rural community, I see it around me, and I see the underinvestment and a lot of the issues that are happening. So to the extent that our nation's cities are experiencing economic and social hardships, our rural communities have it worse. Rural Americans have poorer health, they have higher mortality, fewer diplomas, overall less opportunity than our urban counterparts. We're also struggling with poverty and drug addiction and underinvestment. And these are not moral failings. So often we tend to pair this really grim picture with some sort of moral failure on an individual's part. A lot of it is about opportunity and equitable investment. So let's look at rural nationally by the numbers. According to the latest census, rural America accounts for about 19.3% of the population and 80% of the land. It's also worth noting that less than 2% of rural Americans still make their primary living on farms. This picture right here is from the Daily Yonder, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a national rural online newspaper. It talks about all kinds of economic issues in rural America, rural cultural issues. It might be worth looking up. The Center for Rural Strategies publishes it. So rural people make up about 1/5 of the population, but 85% of our country's persistently poor counties are rural, and 64% of those counties are steeped in generational poverty. And that means that multiple generations of families are struggling to make it on a daily basis. So this statistic here just gets me every time that 1 in 4 rural children live in poverty. And the rate is, of course, higher in specific areas, especially communities of color, especially in certain regions of the country. And this is a region where we have very high rural child poverty. So Tennessee counties are no exception to these statistics. These rates have kept climbing for over a decade. And we all wonder what's the solution, what's the silver bullet that's going to fix all of this. But it's interesting if you look at this, at the data, that rates of broadband access and affordability mirror the distress that we see in rural communities. It's not necessarily the silver bullet, but it is one of the essential tools that gets us on the road to opportunity. I think it's interesting that a recent New York Times piece entitled, "What's the Matter with Eastern Kentucky?" Did anybody read that one? What's the Matter with Eastern Kentucky? It agreed with this sentiment and painted a bleak picture of rural America, not just of Eastern Kentucky. And it suggested that rural people need to get themselves to the cities if they demand connection and better opportunity. A similar piece appeared even more recently in the National Review, exhorting rural people to rent a U-Haul and go elsewhere to find opportunities. Let rural communities just die, it said. And that's a common narrative in these heady times of extreme rhetoric, like I said, in politics and global economic hardship. Why don't people just move where there's opportunity? But frankly, I would say that is very low-level thinking, and it's a distraction for those of us who are committed to building an inclusive nation and inclusive communities where all the people and all the places matter, and especially for those of us who really value our own community. So there's a new trend among big private philanthropies who have decided that cities are where it's at. This idea that cities hold the only key to innovation, that cities are where the emerging economies are, and it's driving investment in philanthropic dollars solely to metro areas. So I'm wondering if any of you all have bumped up against this, if you're a rural nonprofit, if funding has become a real issue for you and the private philanthropy has really shrunk in terms of how much it's willing to engage and give and invest in your community. So somebody needs to tell these philanthropies that rural communities are actually on the front lines of historic economic, social, and ecological shifts. We have 85% of the nation's landmass in our backyard. We're the stewards of our country's food, fuel, and energy. It's also worth noting that the majority of our nation's veterans and servicemen and women are of rural stock. Most of them come from rural America. So the solutions to our nation's biggest challenges, from climate change to transitioning economies, we're experiencing transitioning economies right now. They are born in rural communities out of necessity, and then also out of this feeling that we are all in this together. So this slide right here, I just wanted to show you, this is a snapshot of some of the speakers that we had at the 2015 National Rural Assembly in Washington, D.C. They are an incredibly diverse group. They represent Indian country, the Delta, the Deep South, the Great West, New England, definitely the White House and other agencies. I think a lot of people don't know that rural America is this diverse. Other people that we heard from who addressed broadband specifically as it pertains to their being able to thrive and create economic prosperity in their communities. One was Serena Otabi. She's a first-generation Middle Eastern American from teeny tiny Granite Falls, Minnesota, who's serving on her local city council, and she's working to preserve and revitalize a local historic church, and she's also launching a microbrewery enterprise. We also heard from Nikiko Masumoto. She's a fourth-generation organic peach farmer from California whose grandparents survived the American internment camps in World War II, and they emerged with a desire to start their own farm. Nikiko is now pioneering new growing techniques on this family farm amid horrible climate conditions, horrible droughts in California, and she's about to be featured on a new PBS documentary called The Changing Season. And then also we heard from Cheryl Harmon. She's a young African-American mother in West Virginia who's an all-star community development advocate and a social worker. And in large part, she's able to do her work due to the program called Lifeline, which is a federally funded program that supplements the costs of a cell phone, and now it supplements the cost of broadband data access on that cell phone. So that's how she's been able to pull herself up by her bootstraps, as we love to say. So each and every one of these speakers talked about broadband access as the key component, if not the key component to their work. And then they also gave details about how much, in terms of data, how much economic stimulation their businesses have created in their communities. So they use broadband not just to do that, but also to learn and to share and to participate in the economy and in their communities. And they need high-speed broadband. The National Rural Assembly, which I'm the coordinator, has identified 3 main areas for the next couple of years that we really want to focus on. And these are kids, climate, and connection. We see these as kind of the getting to the heart of the future of our country. We need to address all of these issues. But I would say that connection is really the umbrella or the foundation for both climate and kids. It's the essential tool. So the nation is hurting for innovative, sustainable, and just solutions to big issues like poverty, climate change, and achieving universal connectivity. And I'm just going to say, our state legislature has been passing a number of morally ambiguous, she said it, not me, bills. But I guarantee you, if you were to talk to a constituent, a rural constituent in particular, they're not interested in bathrooms. They're interested in connectivity. And I would say that that's probably true across the whole state in terms of all these three issues, kids, climate, and connection, affect us more on a daily basis than which public bathroom we choose to use. So there's my little, I just had to say it. Before we can get to solutions, though, we have to get connected. And the question before us as a country now, at this moment, I think the question is there a public role and a political will for connecting rural communities? It's not just minimal connection, but the kind of connection that generates economic prosperity. So that means download speeds and upload speeds that can sustain small businesses and entrepreneurs. The Federal Communications Commission says that yes, there is in fact a public role and has already reclassified broadband as a telecommunications service, which makes it as important as the telephone, and it also makes it an essential item. If you want it, you should be able to get it, is what they're saying. The FCC is the federal regulatory body that ensures our communications infrastructure is open and fair and has competition, and it doesn't matter what your zip code is. But the digital divide still remains real, and even since the Great Recession, we're not seeing the numbers climb. Even though we put a bunch of money into this, we're not seeing the numbers climb as fast as we should to access. So, like I said, many of you in this room may be experiencing these issues at home or in your workplaces. Here's some examples of things that people have told me since the 2015 Rural Assembly Gathering. You have to submit a grant application online, but you hit the submit page and the page crashes. And it was the 11th hour for that grant application. You're trying to upload a file to Vimeo or your company's website, and it takes 12 hours. So you have to go home and take a rest while that upload is happening. You want to stream video, music, or download software that's assigned by your child's teacher at school, but you can't complete the assignment without heading over to McDonald's in the adjacent county for their free high-speed Wi-Fi. You're a small business looking to streamline all your finances and your bookkeeping online, and you just don't have the upload speeds to make that available or efficient. So a recent study shows that there's a growing percentage of Americans finding economic success working from home, but 39% of rural households don't have that access to broadband service, compared with only 4% of urban households. And on tribal lands in America, 68% of people are lacking access. Again, connectivity does not guarantee a healthy and wealthy population, but we know that without broadband, communities will fall away. The issue of connectivity reaches beyond homes and businesses. Like I said, kids can't keep up in schools without it, and the FCC estimates that 21% of schools located in rural areas don't have fiber connection, and compare that to 5% of schools in urban areas. Internet use also plays a role in accessing social services and healthcare. It's not just about surfing WebMD. Medical professionals are actually using online tools to pass along health information. Sometimes they're even seeing patients online if you live in a very rural area. Sometimes they do even personalized service with the general practitioner. Rural residents and providers are adapting to use these technological tools to bridge distances. So I could go on and on about the role broadband plays in each of these areas, but I think everybody in the room gets it, and we know. We know that broadband contributes to the cultural vibrancy, health, education, and economic prosperity of a community. So we ought to be talking now about how do we connect rural consumers. There are a host of resources, and there's a lot of data and research out there that gives you an idea of what might be possible in your community. that takes into account policies that are in place in your state or local ordinances. You should look at the Benton Foundation. They've done extensive research in this area, and I couldn't post everything up there, but I definitely tell you to take a look at Benton Foundation. The other is Public Knowledge. It's another nonprofit. It's based in DC, but it also gives you a chart of different steps you could take in your specific state and county to get yourself hooked up to high-speed internet. Then also the Blandin Foundation, and I have a quote here that I liked from Bernadine Johnson during some testimony she gave at a U.S. congressional hearing. I know you hear a lot from the telecom industry, but by contrast, rural community voices are disaggregated, and it can be challenging for rural broadband advocates to counter the industry's message that free market alone will meet community needs. So there's an urgent need out there for rural leaders to join together and bring our voices together so they're not so disaggregated. We may not have the money to change things, but we definitely have the voices, and we have the know-how and the knowledge. I think each one of us could share a personal story about what this kind of connection has meant to our prosperity. I'll just tell you a little bit about how the National Rural Assembly is addressing this. We have a very, very active working group called the Rural Broadband Policy Working Group, and it was formed in 2008 when we were sitting around at one of those big national gatherings, and we were talking about healthcare and education and how do we pull our communities out of this hole. And the topic that resonated the most across all those sectors was broadband and the need to have high-speed internet. So we formed this group, and since then we've been very, very involved in national conversations and national fights for better access, more competition, more open lanes for all people. And we've been working with federal and state and local decision makers, especially in Kentucky and Ohio and California. If you want to talk about what that looks like afterwards, I'd be happy to tell you. So there are different kinds of responses that you can take, and I think the Rural Broadband Policy Working Group does a really good job of dealing with the political side of this issue, but also talking to local leaders on the ground. We've had a number of really great campaigns over the past couple of years, and I just wanted to highlight net neutrality. You might have heard about net neutrality, but it's the idea that everybody has equal access once you're on the internet. So Dale's Fried Pies, if you've ever had one of those, they're delicious, and they're from Knoxville. She gets the same broadband speed as Sara Lee's Bakery would online. So making sure that providers can't charge us for faster lanes on the internet, that's really critical for rural communities. And Edgell made this comment at one of the congressional sessions: don't break the internet before rural gets it, by putting caps like that on these lanes. The other bit is tech transitions, and I'm not sure how much you all might have heard about those, but it's very critical in rural communities especially. We're moving, our technology is changing at rapid fire speed, so we're moving from old technology of copper wiring to to wireless or to fiber optics. And we're losing a lot of redundancy across systems. So in rural communities that are still connected with copper, the service providers are leaving those wires, those copper wires, to just kind of deteriorate as they move us over to wireless. ATT Uverse is a wireless product. But if you have an emergency and the wireless goes down and your copper wires are not maintained, then how are you going to get, contact 911? What do you do about lights? There's all kinds of questions that come up if you're not prepared for these tech transitions. Metro is doing a little bit better job of being on top of this than rural communities are, but it's partly because rural communities have never been well connected anyway. So we're still learning about that. So that's something else the Rural Policy Working Group is working on. And I listed here our principles. I don't feel like I really need to read them, and I feel like I've tried to say all of them, especially communication is a right. So some examples of things that are happening around our region, a lot with municipal broadband. I know you've heard that the Assembly struck down the ability of municipal broadband networks to expand beyond municipal borders. which was that was a blow to rural communities. So thinking about when that comes up next, you might want to put that on your local government's list of things to be talking about and advocating for. Some people are waiting for Google and Facebook to swoop in and fix it, and they're doing that in very discrete places across the country. But again, I would go back to that idea of don't wait for it to come to you, because the likelihood of Google and Facebook coming to Athens is unlikely, I would think. And this idea of broadband as a utility, it is technically a utility now. The FCC has made it a utility so they can regulate it like a utility, and they say that this is something that we are insured to have. We have to have it. So driving that point home with people, that it's not just, if you can afford it, great. If you can't, then you need to move somewhere where you can afford it. This is something that you ought to be able to have no matter where you live. And I shouldn't have put USDA down here, but Connect America funding is really through FCC, and I can talk more about what that looks like, but it's a public-private partnership with private service providers and the federal government to make sure that rural America is getting connected. And I hope that they're actually making strides, and we'll know soon whether or not that's happening. Some other examples, Chattanooga, of course, is the shining light for all of us. It's that big 1 gigabyte that everyone has down there. But of course, it's municipal broadband. So for those communities that are living outside of Chattanooga, that's not necessarily a possibility at this point. Morristown is another municipal broadband system. Scott County, I heard about this from Julie, and maybe she can say more about this, but that the mayor has made this a centerpiece of the work going forward, figuring this out. And that goes a long way. When your leadership decides that this is important, that goes a really long way. I mentioned Athens, Tennessee, because I have incredible broadband access right now, but my rates keep going up, and they're capping my data now too. So, and this is private service providers. But Athens Utility Board is now working with VEC, the Volunteer Energy Co-op, to get fiber optic speeds to businesses and industries. It's not residential, but it's to businesses and industries, which is a step in the right direction. And then I mentioned electric and energy co-ops too, because they have played such a historic role in connecting rural America. And I think there are 27 co-ops out there right now that are actively bringing broadband as a utility to their members. They don't have to worry so much about profits. They worry about what their members need, and they exist to meet their members' needs. So that's another group that you could be advocating with if you are a member of a co-op. And then I put Kentucky here because they've gotten a big shot in the arm of federal dollars for broadband expansion and promise zone money and all kinds of things that are promising to get them connected. But it's not playing out as we had anticipated. And part of that has to do with politics and this getting mixed up in a debate that has, that really doesn't address concerns that are realistic, and on the ground. So it's more of an example of a state that's really struggling with how to deal with this politically and still serve the constituents' needs. I guess you could put Tennessee in that category too. And finally, ways you can take action, and I would say aggregate voices is probably the biggest. We need as many voices as we can have, so if that means participating at a national level with the rural broadband policy group, that's excellent. If that means forming your own task force within your community, that's a wonderful idea. And then thinking about your communications. People don't know that broadband at this point is a utility and that we deserve it and we should have it. So there's a frame there that you could be spreading the word. There's the economic prosperity frame. There's the social justice and civil rights frame. Who has it, who doesn't, is it equitable, and who's left behind when we don't have it. There's also the creative community frame. You could talk to your arts and culture groups. I know in Athens, the Arts Center does so much of its work via broadband. Then, of course, I've talked ad nauseum now about cultivating political will among your local and state policymakers. and support candidates for political office who are committed to quality, affordable access. And then finally, I'm pleased that the Tennessee Economic Community Development Task Force carried out that survey about broadband access, although I think it was carried out over broadband. So if you were in a rural community, I'm not sure if you got to respond, but hopefully your compatriots and your friends in urban areas did that for you, and you got your say in there. I understand they're here today. That's terrific. We all should get to know them. I do believe that they want to help and do what they can, so we need to help them help us, right? And finally, don't wait for the last mile to come to you. That's all I've got. Thank you.